I shouldn't have noticed her the way I did. That's the first thing I need to admit. It was just another late afternoon, the kind where the street outside my apartment carried the sound of children's shoes scuffing the pavement, and the distant hum of traffic that never really stopped. I was fixing the loose railing on the front steps, pretending I knew more about tools than I actually did, when she stepped out of the building next door. Her name was Clara. Mid-40s, though she carried herself with the sort of unbothered grace that made time seem irrelevant. A silk scarf was tied loosely around her neck, the kind of small detail that felt deliberate, like she wanted to distract from everything else her eyes might reveal. I'd seen her before, of course. We lived too close not to. A polite nod here, a faint smile there. But that day she stopped. "Looks like that railing's giving you trouble," she said. Her voice was low, touched with humor but careful, like she didn't want to cross some invisible line. I swallowed, tightening my grip on the screwdriver. "Yeah, well, the railing's winning." She tilted her head, studying the wobbling metal, then me. A pause hung in the air longer than it should have. She could have walked on, but she didn't. "Mind if I?" She gestured at the tools scattered across the step. The image of her fixing something so mundane almost made me laugh, but she crouched down anyway, tucking her hair behind one ear as though it was second nature. Close enough that I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something soft and warm, not loud like the cheap sprays that filled college hallways. I should have said something, anything, but my throat tightened. "You're quiet," she said without looking up. I shrugged, forcing a smile. "You're good at this." Her fingers brushed the metal as she steadied the railing. She didn't answer right away, and the silence worked its way under my skin. Not awkward. Not exactly. Just charged. It was the first time I realized silence could be heavier than words. We stayed like that, me watching, her working, for longer than made sense. Until finally, she leaned back, testing the railing with a small push. "Better. Not perfect, but it'll hold." Her eyes flicked to mine then, just a fraction longer than a neighbor's should. Something unspoken lingered between us. I couldn't name it, but it pulled at me in a way I wasn't ready for. She stood, brushing the dust from her hands. The scarf shifted, revealing the curve of her collarbone. My gaze followed before I could stop it. When her eyes caught mine, I looked away too quickly, heat rushing to my ears. "You're younger than I thought," she said suddenly, almost to herself. I froze. "That bad?" She smiled, small, knowing, not unkind. "Dangerous." The word hung there, sharp and undeniable. She left it for me to carry, like a match struck but never blown out. And just like that, she straightened, murmured a polite goodbye, and turned toward her door. I thought that was it, an odd little encounter, nothing more. But as she reached her steps, she stopped again. Looked back. Our eyes locked. Her hand lingered on the doorknob, but she didn't turn it. Instead, she spoke softly, barely above the noise of the street. "Next time," she said, "don't just watch." Then she disappeared inside, leaving me standing on the steps, my pulse too loud, the railing steady beneath my hand while everything else felt suddenly unsteady. I tried convincing myself it was nothing. Just a neighbor being kind, nothing more. But her voice, low and careful, her smile like she knew too much, stayed with me for days. "Dangerous," she'd said. I didn't know what she meant, but the word hooked itself into me. The next week, it rained. Heavy, endless sheets that blurred the street lamps outside my window. I was halfway through some mindless scrolling when I heard a knock at my door. Not loud. Just enough to pull me out of myself. When I opened it, Clara stood there, hair damp from the storm, holding a crooked picture frame in her hands. "Do you happen to know how to fix this?" she asked. She lifted it a little, embarrassed. "The hook snapped, and I thought, well, you seem good with your hands." I almost laughed. If she'd seen me swearing at that railing a week ago, she'd know the truth. But the way she looked at me, half teasing, half uncertain, I couldn't say no. Yeah, I lied softly. Come in. Her shoes left small wet prints on the wooden floor as she stepped inside. The apartment suddenly felt too small, too quiet. She moved slowly, scanning the shelves, the unwashed mug on the counter, the books stacked unevenly. Nothing about her presence was casual. She set the frame down on the table and slipped off her scarf. That's when I saw it, her hand lingering at her collarbone, brushing lightly over skin as if out of habit. A gesture too intimate to ignore, but too natural to be deliberate. I busied myself with the frame, fumbling with screws, but my thoughts wouldn't stop circling her. The faint smell of rain clung to her. She didn't fill the silence with small talk. She just watched, calm, patient, like she had all the time in the world. Were you always alone here? She asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. Yeah. Why? She tilted her head, eyes narrowing just slightly. You seem restless. I wanted to ask how she could see that. I wanted to ask how she noticed something I hadn't even admitted to myself. Instead, I muttered, Guess I'm not great at sitting still. Her smile was faint, but her eyes didn't look away. Me either. Something in her voice cracked then, so subtle I almost missed it. Like she meant to sound light, but the words carried weight. I wanted to ask what she meant. Who she was restless for. But my throat tightened, and instead I tightened the last screw on the frame. There, I said, setting it upright. Good as new. She stepped closer, her hand brushing mine as she reached for it. The touch was brief, accidental maybe, but enough to make my pulse stumble. Her eyes flicked to mine, steady, searching. You should stay a while, she said, almost a whisper. It's still pouring out there. I should have excused myself, made some awkward joke, anything. But her hand was still on the frame, still close enough to touch mine again, and all I could do was stand there, caught between leaving and confessing something I wasn't supposed to say. The storm hadn't let up. Rain streaked the windows, blurring the world outside. I told myself I'd only stay for a few minutes, just long enough for it to ease up. But Clara made tea, without asking, just moving through my kitchen like she belonged there, and somehow minutes became longer. She sat across from me at the small table, hands wrapped around a steaming cup. The light above flickered once, then steadied, leaving the room dim. Her eyes stayed on mine too long, like she was waiting for me to say something I wasn't sure I had the right to. Do you ever feel? She began, then paused. Her finger traced the rim of the cup, slow, distracted. Like life got away from you? Like you missed the one thing you should have fought for? The question hit harder than I expected. Her voice was steady, but the faint tremor in her hand gave her away. I swallowed, my throat dry. Yeah. More than I want to admit. She looked up sharply, as though I'd said something too close to her own secret. For a moment, the silence between us was unbearable. I shifted, meaning to break it, when she reached across the table, fingers brushing mine, so soft it almost wasn't a touch at all. My breath caught. That was when the knock came. Sharp. Sudden. The kind of sound that snapped reality back into place. Clara's hand withdrew instantly. She stood, her scarf sliding from the back of the chair. I could see her chest rise and fall faster than before, though her face was composed when she opened the door. A man's voice filtered through the hall, friendly, casual. Hey, just checking you got home safe. Power might cut out with this storm. Her neighbor, maybe? Or more. She nodded quickly, keeping the door only half open. Thanks, Mark. I'm fine. The exchange lasted seconds, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. She was different with him, polite, detached. Nothing like how she had been with me just moments earlier. When she shut the door, the silence roared back. She turned slowly, her eyes finding mine again. Something unspoken passed between us, the awareness that what just happened, her hand on mine, her words, wasn't something she let everyone see. I started, pushing my chair back. I should probably go. But my body didn't move. My hand still rested on the table where hers had been. She stepped closer, closing the distance. Not hurried. Deliberate. Her voice softened, almost pleading. Don't. My chest tightened. I knew I should leave, that staying would only tangle things further, but the weight in her eyes pinned me to the spot. Clara, I began, the name breaking in my throat. She tilted her head, just slightly, like she was listening for something more. My confession hung unspoken between us, and yet my silence said it anyway. The storm outside thundered, rattling the glass. Inside, everything felt still. Too still. Her hand lifted, hovering just above my arm, not touching, not yet. And I couldn't tell if the next second would be the one where she pulled away, or the one where we crossed the line completely. The thunder rolled again, low and drawn out, like the sky itself was waiting. Clara's hand hovered just above my arm, and I swear I could feel the heat of it without the touch. My body was frozen, every muscle caught between leaning forward and pulling back. Her eyes didn't move. Dark, steady, unwavering. You make this harder, she whispered finally. I swallowed. Harder than what? Her lips curved, not a smile, not exactly. More like a secret she wasn't sure she wanted me to see. Then pretending. The words hit me like a door unlatched. Pretending. That she didn't notice me, that her voice didn't soften when she spoke to me, that my eyes didn't follow her every move. Pretending we weren't already teetering on the edge of something neither of us should touch. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My chest was too tight. She stepped closer, and I could smell the faint trace of rain still clinging to her scarf. You're too young, she murmured, almost as if reminding herself. Then softer. And I'm too tired of doing the right thing. The honesty in her voice cracked something open in me. All the restraint I'd been gripping felt useless. I think about you, I said suddenly, the words escaping before I could catch them. My voice was low, raw, almost ashamed. More than I should. Her eyes closed for a moment, and when they opened again, they burned with something I couldn't name. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pressed down on us, thick and heavy. My pulse hammered in my ears, waiting for her to say something, anything that would pull me back or push me forward. Then, her phone buzzed. The sound sliced through the moment, sharp and jarring. She turned her head toward the counter where it lit up, the name flashing across the screen too quickly for me to read. She didn't move to answer. Didn't break her stare. The phone went silent again, leaving only the rain and our uneven breathing. Her hand finally lowered, brushing the sleeve of my shirt, light enough to feel accidental but deliberate enough to know it wasn't. My whole body went rigid at the contact. Tell me, she said softly, almost staring. What happens if you stay? My breath caught. The question hung between us, larger than the room, larger than the storm outside. I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell her everything I hadn't said, everything I'd been holding back. But the words stuck. All I could do was look at her, at the faint tremor in her hand, at the exhaustion in her eyes that didn't dim the fire behind them. Neither of us moved. Neither of us blinked. And the silence became the most dangerous thing I'd ever stood inside. Her question, what happens if you stay, was still vibrating in my chest when she finally stepped back. Just enough to leave space between us. Just enough to make it hurt. She turned toward the window, arms crossing over herself as if the storm outside had crept into her bones. For a moment, I thought she was retreating into silence. But then she spoke, her voice lower than before. You remind me of him. The words startled me. Of who? She didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed on the glass, blurred with raindrops and city light. My ex-husband. When we first met. He was restless. Curious. Always watching the world like he wanted to wrestle something from it before it disappeared. The comparison hit me like a cold slap. I didn't want to be him, not if he'd left her looking this hollow. but her shoulders tensed as if even saying his name had scraped something raw. I wanted to tell her I wasn't him. That what I wanted from her wasn't careless, wasn't temporary. But my mouth stayed shut, too afraid of sounding like a boy playing at promises he couldn't keep. She finally turned, meeting my eyes. There was something unfinished in her gaze. Something she hadn't meant to say but couldn't pull back now. And then, another knock at the door. Louder this time. Her body stiffened instantly. For a second, I thought it was the neighbor again, or maybe the man from the phone. But when she opened the door, my stomach dropped. A woman stood there, mid-30s, damp from the rain, clutching an umbrella. Same eyes, same sharp cheekbones. Younger. Softer. Her sister. "Clara," she said, brushing rain from her hair as she stepped inside without waiting. "You weren't answering your phone." Clara's face stayed carefully neutral, but I saw the flicker in her eyes when her sister noticed me standing at the table. "And you are?" the sister asked, tilting her head, a small smile playing at her lips. I opened my mouth, but Clara cut in too quickly. "Just helping me with something. The storm knocked things loose." Her sister's smile widened, sly, like she didn't believe a word. She walked closer, her eyes flicking between us, lingering on the way Clara's scarf had slipped, the faint red flush in her cheeks. Then she looked at me, direct, teasing, almost cruel. "Careful. You belong to her now." The words were said lightly, like a joke, but they landed heavy, echoing inside me. Clara froze. Her lips parted as if she wanted to protest, to deny, but she didn't. She just stared at me, the storm raging behind her eyes more violent than the one outside. And in that stare, I realized something had shifted. She couldn't pretend anymore. Neither could I. The room felt too small, her sister's words hanging in the air like a verdict neither of us could take back. Her sister's words sat heavy in the room. You belong to her now. Clara didn't laugh, didn't brush it off. She just stood there, staring at me like she wanted to deny it but couldn't bring herself to lie. Her sister lingered, clearly sensing the current in the air, before retreating to the kitchen with an exaggerated shrug. "I'll make tea," she said, leaving the two of us alone again. The silence she left behind was unbearable. I couldn't stand it anymore. "You don't have to pretend," I said softly, stepping closer. Clara's eyes snapped to mine. "Pretend about what?" "That this doesn't matter." My voice cracked, the words rushing out before I could stop them. "That I don't see you. That you don't see me." Her breath hitched. For once, the calm composure she always wore slipped. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to the edge of the table, as if it was the only thing keeping her steady. "You're young," she whispered. "And I'm old enough to know better." "Then tell me to go," I shot back. My chest burned. "Say it, and I'll walk out that door right now." She didn't. She just looked at me, really looked at me, like she was weighing every reason to push me away against the one reason she couldn't. Her sister's voice drifted faintly from the kitchen, clinking cups, the kettle beginning to whistle. The world outside moved on, but for me, it stopped right there. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice breaking. "I'm so tired of wanting and never reaching. Of always choosing what's safe, what's proper." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "You terrify me because you make me want again." The words left me breathless. I stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of her body, close enough that her scarf brushed against my shirt. "Then don't fight it," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Her hand lifted, hesitant, trembling, and for a moment, hovered near my chest. When her palm finally pressed against me, it was light, almost unsure, but it set my whole body on fire. We stood like that, the storm outside pounding against the windows, her sister's kettle shrieking in the distance, and still neither of us moved away. "I can't promise you forever," Clara said quietly, almost like a confession. "But I can promise I won't pretend anymore." I closed my eyes, her words sinking deep. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't safe. But it was real. When I opened them again, she was still there, her hand on me, her breath uneven, her eyes waiting. And in that moment, everything unspoken finally broke free between us, not in words, but in the silence that said more than either of us could. The storm passed some time after midnight, but inside Clara's apartment, time moved differently. The kettle had long gone quiet, her sister had slipped out with a knowing look and no questions, and we were left with only the hum of silence between us. She still hadn't let go of me. Her hand rested on my chest like an anchor, as if pulling away would mean the moment wasn't real. "I don't know how this ends," she said softly, her eyes searching mine. "But I know I don't want to keep running from it." I covered her hand with mine. For the first time all night, the fear inside me settled. "Then don't." It wasn't a grand confession. It wasn't a promise of forever. It was something smaller, more fragile, but truer than anything I'd ever said. Clara's shoulders sagged, the years of regret she carried seeming to loosen their grip. Her lips parted like she wanted to say more, but instead she simply leaned in, pressing her forehead to mine. The touch was light, reverent, filled with all the words either of us could find. In that closeness, something shifted. We weren't neighbors anymore, or strangers bound by circumstance. We were two people who had been standing at the edge of our lives and finally chose to step forward, even if we didn't know where it would lead. When her hand finally slid down to intertwine with mine, I realized how much had changed since the first moment I saw her on those front steps. Back then, she had been untouchable, graceful, distant, untouchable in the way the sky is untouchable. Now she was here, vulnerable, breaking her own rules to hold me. The danger was still there. The uncertainty, the judgment from others, even the whisper of her sister's teasing words, "You belong to her now." But what once felt like a warning now felt like a truth I could live with. Because I did. I belonged to her. And in her quiet, steady gaze I saw that she belonged to me too. We stayed like that for a long time, the storm outside finally giving way to clear skies. Morning crept in slowly, soft and golden, spilling across her living room floor. The world hadn't ended. Nothing had collapsed. And yet, everything between us had changed. When I finally pulled back to look at her, Clara gave me a faint, tired smile, the kind that carried both fear and hope. "So, what happens if you stay?" I didn't hesitate this time. I squeezed her hand, grounding us both. "Then we stop pretending." Her eyes closed as if the words themselves were a relief she'd been waiting years to hear. And for the first time, we weren't afraid of the silence anymore. Sparkles, did you enjoy the story? Redheart, what kind of stories would you like to hear next? Romantic, emotional, suspenseful? Speechaloon, share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear them.